Lettie Sullivan is the daughter of Luther, the wife of Corey, the mother of 3, the business owner of Letting Go with Lettie, a licensed spiritual practitioner since 2012, the founder of Full Moon Goddess Gatherings, the Sunday service producer and board member here at Speakeasy. Lettie will be speaking on God and a Few Good Men for our Father's Day celebration. Please help me welcome Lettie Sullivan.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. You know, this talk has been living in me for the past couple weeks since Maureen asked me. And so I'm just really grateful to be able to stand here. Like, I don't take it for granted, the opportunity to speak into your listening and to share some of the wisdom and some of my stories that I've lived through. And so the first one is really like my first introduction to God. When I was a little girl, I remember, and I didn't do this too frequently, but you know, when those childhood memories come up, I remember kneeling by the side of my bed and reciting the Lord's Prayer. Did anybody ever have to do that? Say the Lord's Prayer? Here, say it with me. It says, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and glory forever and ever. Amen." Right? And how that gets ingrained, like, in us. Like when you think about the Lord's Prayer, it just comes up, right? Like, our Father. And so the cool thing about the Lord's Prayer is that it happened when Jesus was really kind of making a splash on the scene, right? This is his first big talk. It was the Sermon on the Mount, right? And the Sermon on the Mount was, you know, this situation where him and his disciples, somehow the word got out that a master teacher was in the house, and all these people showed up, right? So many people that he had to climb to the highest surface so that people could see him and hear him speak. And this is where, you know, in modern terms, this is where Jesus is really laying out his curriculum, his brand, like, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm teaching. And if you remember, if you look at the Sermon at the Mount again, this is where the highlights, Jesus, when he's saying, ask and you shall receive. He said, love your enemies. He said, you know, you are the salt of the earth, right? He talked about how to pray, how to fast, about your oaths, about divorce and remarriage. Like, he laid the whole thing out, right, in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. But right in the middle of this talk that he's giving, right, this epic talk, he tells us how to pray. And in this first sentence of the Lord's Prayer, he's kind of giving you everything you need to connect with a higher power and higher source. He said, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And he chooses his words very carefully. This is one of the reasons why Jesus' teachings have endured over millennia. It's because he was saying something on the surface, but then there was this whole other layer of meaning underneath it that maybe a small select few were taught that additional meaning, but now in the information age, we all have access to the deeper mysteries of the Bible. And so from a metaphysical standpoint, when Jesus says our Father, now the literal definition that we all know, a father is one who has begotten a child, who gives origin to, a generator. Metaphysically speaking, the deeper meaning, God as the Father is the great cause. It's the cause of all life, of all being. There's just one source from which all living things and living objects proceed. We call this source Father. Jesus called this source Father because he is the cause of all things. Who art in heaven? Now, heaven kind of gets muddled a little bit because they talk about pearly gates and streets paved with gold and mansions. And we can think of this as a more material concept. But the truth is that heaven is the Christ consciousness. It is that realm of divine mind. It's a state of consciousness that's in harmony with God, with the thoughts of God. It's everywhere present. It's orderly and lawful. It's an adjustment of God's kingdom in your mind, in your affairs, in your body. Now, Jesus specifically in the next chapter, in Luke, he talks about where the kingdom of heaven is. He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. Okay, so he orients it within you. Okay, it's within each and every one of us, and it's not material, it's spiritual. Hallowed be thy name. To hallow something, to hallow the name of God, is to realize that this name means wholeness and perfection. So to paraphrase it, when Jesus says, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," he actually means the source of all life, that consciousness of harmony with God is dwelling within you, making you whole. I'll say it again. Source of all life, the consciousness that's in harmony with God is dwelling within you, making you whole and perfect. This is how he's saying you pray. You pray by connecting with that power and that consciousness that is where all life is generated. It lives within you, right? And so as a child, learning the surface level of prayer, as I got older, I went on a spiritual journey that didn't include the spirituality of my origin, right? I kind of had to lay down everything that I was taught to find my true connection with spirit. Because as children, sometimes we inherit the spirituality of our parents, of our family systems. Many of us were born into a faith tradition that we carried forward, because that's just the way things were. But as an adult, you get the opportunity to take a step back and say, how does this apply to my life? Is this true for me? What is it conjuring within me? Is it providing comfort in my time of need? Is it lifting me up? Is it making me feel guilty or inadequate or afraid? So as an adult, as we grow into spiritual maturity, it's essential to start to question, what is the deeper meaning of this? Am I just taking something whole cloth that someone handed to me that no longer fits? Or is there a new thought that I could have about this? So the question is, have you gone back? In the 12-step tradition, it talks about taking a searching and fearless moral inventory, right? And have we done that? It's really, really deep, wonderful work. Now, it's Father's Day. And, it's interesting as a mom, having a father in my life in the form of my husband, right? We have 3 children. And our first child, our son Jarrell, was a surprise baby because we were told that, my husband was told that he wouldn't be able to produce children. And so when we were dating, it was a huge conversation for us to sit down, for him to say to me, if you want children of your own, I'm not going to be able to provide that for you. The question was, can you still love me even if we can't have that in our future? And my answer was, of course, absolutely. If I did want to have children, we could adopt or something else. But it was off the plate. Early in our relationship, we didn't really have a conversation about what kind of father or what kind of mother we wanted to be. What did we want to raise our children? How did we want to raise them? We didn't have to go there, right? So we had 4 years of really not being in the conversation of being parents. And then I got knocked up, right? And we don't have to go into how that happened. Obviously, the doctor was wrong. The doctor was wrong. And then we had to come to the table and have that conversation about how did we want to raise our children. And, this photo is from our last pregnancy and delivery. But there's just such a beautiful moment from carrying a child and then handing that child over to the person who created it with you, and let them have that moment of connecting. You know, when you're pregnant, you're holding them 24/7, and then you hand it over to someone who gets to hold them for the first time and feel their heartbeat and feel their limbs and see their eyes. And I knew I had a responsibility to support him in becoming a father. I didn't know what the heck I was doing and becoming a mother, but my mother ran a daycare center, so I knew the nuts and bolts of everything. So I knew that we were going to be able to at least keep the baby alive, right? But it was, you know, for all of the basic skills that I had in parenting, what was missing for me was this level of nurturing and love and support and consistency and play. Like, I didn't really have that. My mom was a working mom, you know, and I was a latchkey kid. So I came home from school, I had the keys, I had to come in, make myself something to eat. I was fully self-sufficient by age 10. Like, I'm not kidding you. So I didn't have that experience of having an adult, a parent, taking care of me on a regular basis. I was taking care of myself. My husband didn't have that experience. He actually had, he also had a working mom, but she was there to nurture, to support, to care. She really cherished him. And this is not a knock against my own mom. She was doing the best she could, right? But his mom really cherished him and created an environment that really loved and supported him. So I knew that our children were going to have that. I knew that the more time that we were able to get, they were able to get with him, the better. Because he could give them something that was not innate for me. And so one of my decisions as a new mom was to make sure that he could feed them just as much as I could feed them. So I was kind of pumping like crazy, right? To make sure. And then, you know, everything that you kind of read, like, you know, take off your shirt and hold the baby against your skin. And we did all that great stuff. And one of the things that it did was, you know, what this scripture says, it says, he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. And it's one of those situations where I'm not the primary parent. They're not all, mommy, mommy, mommy. Their default is daddy, daddy, daddy. and it's such a wonderful gift that they have with him being first. I wanted him to be first in their lives. At the time, you know, I was 24 and 26 when I had Maya and Jarrell, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to be a mom. I was still trying to figure out who I was. And he gave me the space. He took his life and he wrapped it around those children. And even now, they fight to sit next to him at the restaurant, right? Like, you know, I usually have to sit across from him because he's generally flanked by these two. You know, there's a story that Corey told me. Well, we lived it, but I asked for his permission if I could tell it. And it was a moment, you know, after Jarrell was diagnosed with autism. You know, sometimes when you have a child with special needs, you have to let go of the vision that you had, right, for what your life was going to look like with that child, right? Especially for a father and son. I think fathers that have sons, they think about what they're going to teach them, how they're going to maybe do better than what their dad did, or how they're going to allow them to maybe avoid some of the pitfalls or the hang-ups or the hurts and pains that they had growing up. And it was no different for us as a family and for Corey. You know, we had to do some work. You know, we had to do some personal development work. We had to take some workshops and classes. We had to read books. We had to heal our hearts because there's something, you know, when you realize that you kind of have this uphill climb with supporting and loving your children, even though you don't fully understand what's going on with them, you don't know what they're going to need. We took on the journey to figure it out. We had to figure it out. And so, you know, Corey had gone to a spiritual development workshop. and Landmark. Okay, so he came back from Landmark, and he had a breakthrough. He had an aha moment that he had shared. And it was, being a father, one of the concerns that we had with Jarrell having autism was him being bullied and picked on by kids just for being different, And even if your child doesn't have special needs, it's always a concern that somebody will abuse your child when they're not with you, right? Which is a huge fear. So you want to teach them how to take care of themselves. And so, the way that Corey went about it was he wanted to instill in him courage, right? He didn't want him to be a scared little boy. But the playbook that was handed to him as a male, as most males in this culture and society, is boys don't cry, right? Boys don't cry. But there was that moment where Jarrell's crying, and he cried a lot, y'all. He cried a lot. Well, there were a lot of things going on when he was little, right? Just maybe sensory integration, things in the environment that he didn't understand, all kinds of reasons why he was the way he was. And we loved and accepted him where he was. And there was this moment where Corey realized, Jarrell's crying, and he's like, stop it, stop crying. And Jarrell's body language and his facial expression and everything was in response to the energy he was receiving. And he was cowering. And it was in that moment that he realized that I'm doing the opposite of what I actually am intending here. I'm turning him into a scared little boy instead of preventing that. And that breakthrough informed our parenting, not just for him, but for all of our children, to be in that space of acceptance of who they are. That we might, as parents, have a vision for what we want our children to be, but we don't have control over that. We can't control them. We can control the energy that we present for them, the energy that we immerse them in. And it was in that moment that there was this unlocking of compassion and acceptance that allowed Jarrell the space to become comfortable in his own skin. We took a trip to San Francisco, Jarrell and I together. And I felt like if there was a situation where someone was coming to us to do us harm, I actually had confidence that my son would stand there for me. He would stand for me and put himself on the line. At 17 years old, he didn't say, "Mommy, I will protect you." But the way he stood by me and stood for me was just as powerful as if his father was standing there. And I don't think that was something that you taught him directly, but he carries that spirit within him of protection. And I'm so proud of that. Let's see. I didn't mean to say any of that. It's totally not on my page. The last good man that I want to talk about, I said it's God and a few good men. And, I didn't have that opportunity to have my father in the home because my parents' relationship ended while my mother was still pregnant. Okay, so she left, okay? She never really told me the story, so it doesn't really apply here. But she left with me inside her. And my father actually never left the house that he shared with her. Even now, he still lives in the home that he shared with my mother over 40 years ago. And he always expected her to come back, right? Like, he didn't go anywhere. But she left and she held a grudge like a bug, right? But at age 30, I got curious, right? Because all I had to work with was my mom never had a bad word to say about my dad. She said that he was intelligent, that he loved music, lives in Chicago, that he was a Muslim, and that I looked just like his sister Francine. Like, I heard that so much. He was like, you look just like your Aunt Francine. My siblings, who are like 9, 8, and 6 years older than me, lived in the family that they had together, and they said my dad was a great dad, that he took them to the park. He made them pancake breakfast. He treated them like they were his own. And these are the stories that I had about my dad. And, that was good enough for me. There wasn't like this big conversation about why my father isn't here and, oh, something's missing. It was good enough for me to know that I came from someone who was loving, intelligent, and was just a good person. But by the time I turned 30, I was kind of like, what's my history? Like, there's a big hole in my history. And so I wanted to find out. Fortunately, it had a very unique name, and so I Googled it, finally, right? Back in 2006, typed in Google, bam, got a hit, first time. And followed the trail of breadcrumbs. It went from this document that had his name in it that was from Mayor Daley commending him and his team for something they did for a government agency online to, okay, where's this agency? Okay, let me call. What's the phone number? Who's in the directory? Right? And so I did this journey to find him, and it took like literally an hour. But I was on the phone with his then wife, and that was a very interesting conversation. And but she did pass along my information, and 2 days later I got the call. And at the time, we were trying to decide when we were going to get together and meet up for lunch, and again, there was no question of paternity per se, because he was waiting for me to come back at some point, so it was like, okay, well, I guess today's the day. It's kind of how that went down. And so so I met him on a Monday downtown at a restaurant, and I walked in the door, and I saw that smile, and I saw that face, and I just felt at home. I felt that connection. And, we had a great conversation. It flowed. There was just something that felt complete. And the next step was to take me home to his mom. And I went and I met my grandmother and my great aunt, her sister, and my sister Kim and her children, and my brother Mike and his wife and his children. And making that connection was an incalculable gift, right, for me, to hear my father's stories of his childhood, the stories that were passed along from him. I didn't know what I was missing until I got it. And so for this part of my talk, I really want to honor the men who had their choice taken from them. There are plenty of men who don't get the opportunity to be in their children's lives, but as an adult, sometimes it's hard to even think about connecting with an adult child, but to stick with it to get the gold. So I want to ask a question to lead us into our discussion a little bit later, is how does your father's legacy live within you? And dads, what do you want to be remembered for? Because, what I know and what lives within me from my father is that family is family, and we take care of each other. And that's been the biggest gift you've given me, is like, no, we're family, and we take care of our own. And I'm grateful for that. And that's the word.